stories is captured on the front pages this morning. Remember, your thoughts are always welcomed, although with the reminder that it's about constructive criticism if you choose to do so. Whereas we also accommodate civility in our approach to discussing national issues of interest. We'll take a break, and when we return, our reviewer will join us in a bit. While I hear the reviewer is already online to join us virtually. Well, having said that, let's look to connect with our reviewer who joins the program this morning. Hello, good morning to you, sir. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Mr. Bright. Always a delight to see you.
Well,
How are you doing?
Very well. The ever mercurial Seun Oni. Let's get straight into the conversations this morning. And one of the places to start would be talks about the fuel subsidy cut gains. The president speaking through the Minister of State Finance, Dr. Doris Uzoka Anyete, pledged that the money saved from cell subsidy removal would be transparently spent in reinvestments in critical sectors to include infrastructure. Well, what do you make of these conversations this morning as it concerns the subsidy gains, or should I say, the post-fuel subsidy regime?
That's a good one from the minister, and is actually not supposed to be a statement for the cameras. That is the expectation of every was actually one that impacted everyone across the length and breadth of the country. Immediately it was removed, we saw the surge, the increase in the price of fuel, and the attendant effect on socioeconomic activities in the country. The promise before the removal of the fuel subsidy was that a number of infrastructural deficits in the health sector, in the academia, especially in our road network, that has largely been responsible for the level of underdevelopment and industrialization we experienced as a country, would get expedited their attention. Over the course of the 2 years, the jury has been that we have not seen that level of expedited action across the socioeconomic gaps in our infrastructure as promised by the federal government. And the argument was that one intends, or one actually thinks, that the federal government would keep to its word by ensuring that these extra resources are not freighted into the purses of the state executives, which of course are the governor. Everyone on the streets are now aware. For instance, we heard the Minister of FCT in one of his media appearances a few days ago, did clearly stated that what was governor, the highest amount of money he ever received as a state FAC was actually 14 billion naira in a month, but that there are state governors who receive as high as 50 billion monthly now, and thanks in part to the removal of the fuel subsidy. But of course, this is the reality across the 36 states of the federation. But are we seeing commensurate infrastructural drive? Are we seeing investment in health sectors? Are we seeing investment in the educational sector and other sectors that make up, of course, the economy? The answer definitely is no. Some of us, we travel by road, and it's still the same sad and sorry state. I was on the road a few weeks ago on my way from Lagos because I had to do something in Ekiti State, and it was all harrowing experience from the long stretch. The moment you leave the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which of course is not completely done, despite several years of pushing the completion date, The moment you swerve into Osun State, you'll be greeted with bad roads. You enter Ekiti State, and it's even worse. By the time you are done with Ekiti State and you get to part of Ondo, you get to part of Kogi State, some places are practically impassable. And these are governors who are now beginning to receive multiple of what they used to collect before now. So it's really a very, it's more like the chicken and egg scenario. Which one actually comes first? People expect that when you remove the fuel subsidy, the extra amount of resources will now be pushed into serious infrastructural drive. Now it has been removed. Our dire and terrible infrastructural deficit are still greeting us every day. So that statement, like I said, is not one for the camera. It's one for serious soul searching. Why, in spite of the humongous resources now available to our government, we are still not seeing commensurate impact across the length and breadth of Nigeria.
Now, Mr. Seun, this opinion you have is one that the IMF has also re-echoed. I was looking at the publication following the Nigerian IMF consultation, and it also did capture this same assertion you have made, that the impacts of the fuel subsidy games and even the current reforms under the Renewed Hope agenda are yet to reflect on the lives of Nigerians. I heard you mention that the state governors also have a part to play in this owing to increased FAC allocations. How do we ensure that governments across the federation are held accountable in the use, or should I use the words or borrow words from what the minister said, the reinvestment of this fuel subsidy savings?
That's, for me, a million naira question. And I have to be a bit harsh on our colleagues in the civil society space. We saw a dip in the activities of civil society players, due likely in part to the embargo, or will I say complete withdrawal of funds from some of the international donors who are being financed from the US coffer. Sadly, a whole lot of activities and attention is usually geared towards making or ensuring that the federal government are accountable to their responsibilities. But I must be very profound this morning that the local government and the state government, despite receiving over 40% of the nation's resources, have not been held to account. The level of accountability or the spotlight and focus on their activities, if I may say, leaves very much to be desired. Even when this report come out, you could see that they are not far-reaching. They are, I was privy to a report by one of the civil society actors a few, less than 2 years now, from a state that is practically backward in every indices you want to look at. Infrastructure, health, the education sector, even its civil society is one of the most backward in Nigeria. And a civil society brought out a report and was praising them seriously about the transparency. And the question I actually asked, in fact, they were rated as the most transparent state in the country. And the question I was asking is, then what is the purpose of the thematic focus on transparency if it does not reflect in change and improvement in the lives of the citizens of that state? If it does not impact, I mean a state where all the roads is actually a nodal state that has boundary with between 9 to 10 states, and all the roads leading to the state, they are impassable, all. The roads will be good to the state that had boundary with them. The moment you enter their own state, you can't see anything. And the governor goes everywhere and is celebrating the fact that his state is the most transparent. Transparent in what context? These are the issues. So much attention is on the federal government, and the civil society actors are doing very little on the state government. By the way, we also have our blame, those of us who are in the media, and I must be very honest about this, because sadly, no one would pretend that he doesn't know that the governors, using the apparatus of their commissioner for information, the first thing they do when they are sworn into office is to see how they practically colonize the state-owned media, whether it's radio or television, and a number of them who actually have their own state-owned print. That's the first thing. You see quickly they will remove those who are sitting as the MDs and what have you, and now bring party men to run it. And so the only thing they talk about, show, and write is simply the things they want people, the narrative they want to show to the public. And so those of us who are not under that obligation, how much also in the media have we really gone to ensure that we spotlight some of these issues that can bring the governors across the 36 states, and very vitally the 74 local government areas in the country. So that's where we found ourselves, because citizens have gotten to a point where they have resigned to faith. I had this engagement just a few days ago, and I was telling the citizens, they were everywhere complaining, and I asked them a simple question. Now you have the monthly FAC allocation released in newspapers. Virtually all the media houses will announce the amount that goes to each of the states. How many times have you walked up? Because I know the person, I know how close his house actually is to the local government. How many times have you actually gone to ensure that your local government chairman, who by the way was elected by the people, democratically elected, that he is actually accountable? How many times? He says no. But you are more involved with shouting President Tinubu, and you are somewhere in Ekiti East local government making that noise, and your own local government chairperson is just a stone throw from your house. So he just told me, he said, no, it's federal that is important. So that's the thinking. That tells you about our psychology as a people. We just resign to faith, people that we can hold accountable so that we see immediate impact, because the closest government to the citizenry is actually the local government system, followed by the state. But unfortunately, the way we want to keep our leaders to account is that we jump the guns. We don't look at what local government chairmen and chairpersons are doing. We don't really care what our governors are doing. We are just interested in what the president is doing. And sadly, the resources that goes to the local government combined is about 48% of the resources that comes to the country. It's just about 52% that are domiciled with the federal government. So until we change that, I call it inverted pyramid thinking, we might really not get the needed result.
Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Whilst these conversations are on how we can hold them accountable and the involvement of stakeholders away from the CSOs, the medias, and even the communities in question, the challenge is that some states are still borrowing despite this FAC allocation increase. Just a couple of days ago, I saw the report in one of the dailies that over 20 states in Nigeria have increased their indebtedness. It's a question of fiscal discipline, even on the part of these administrators as well. What do you think is going wrong? Is it the political will, or is it because there are no instrumentalities in place to follow the use of the said borrow storms or even the increased FAC?
Now, you need to we need to also understand the appetite of a capitalist or a means economic driven government is just true to the nature. You see, there is an economic philosophy that tends to suggest that your borrowing appetite increases the moment your capacity to earn more revenue increases. Let me repeat that again. Your appetite to borrow increases the moment you see that your capacity to earn revenue increases. And so the thinking is that since you now have improved source of earning, you can now plan how you will repay what you borrow. Because what you are earning is, using economic terms, is about the future. That is an earning that you don't have now. But your books show that historically, this is how much you earn on a monthly basis. So when they bring their commissioners and some of the advisors in, what they tell them most often than not is that we need to borrow to show people what they call legacy projects. And so we now tell the banks or the international financial institutions that we have X and Y capacity to pay back. And of course, financial institutions also have their monies waiting for would-be borrowers who have the capacity to pay back. So I think that that's likely what has driven most of these states that we have seen that are increasing their penchant to borrow. In fact, I know of a state that suddenly its borrowing trajectory now grew over the past 12 months. And it's simply in part that they now see that they have more money. And so if we have more money, why not let's borrow lump sum that will pay over a certain period of time? But I really think that is not very ideal. And oftentimes when we start talking about the earning of the borrowing, often the blame is laid squarely on the federal government. You just hear such thing as the debt of Nigeria has increased. But many people don't factor in that a number of states, you can imagine 20 states are borrowing in the past few months. So when you add that, it becomes the debt burden of the entire nation and the focus. So it still goes back to what I'm saying. We must ensure that we don't just put all our focus on the federal government. We must be asking the right questions. Let me state another example. I was in a certain state for a media job, and the roads across the length and breadth of the state, they are death traps. And when I got to the state capital, I was shell-shocked seeing flyover projects across two venues. I mean, very huge project. So I was privileged to meet with one of the state officials, very senior state officials. So I now asked him the question that why is the priority on flyover when all the state roads, they are impassable? He said, government is a continuum, but every governor, we want to leave legacy project. So if I'm doing road, people don't see that as a legacy. It's a normal road that everyone, but if I do bridge, so when I live there, I will tell them I did bridge 1, I did flyover 2, and so for them. So it still goes back to our thinking. Economic decisions are not taken by these people. Often they usually take decisions based on the prism of politics. So it is political decisions before economic expediency. So that's a sad thing.
Well, let's move away from this issue and look at another issue making the rounds in the news. And usually it's from the angle that our local currency is a statement of or should I say a reflection of the state of our economy? Now, earlier, the Guardian newspaper had an infographics looking at the performance of the Naira vis-a-vis currencies like the Rand, CDs, the West African CFA, and the pounds in the first half of the year, starting on the 7th of January up until the 7th of July. And it's with the worry that some fiscal inefficiencies have eroded the potential of the Naira, despite a local currency in the US, the dollar, also waning all through the first half of the year. Talks about strengthening the Naira and the approach by the current government. What is your judgment of how we're fared in the first half of 2025?
Well, that is a very important perspective to see things, in my opinion. But you must also bear in mind that the economy is actually on a rebound. We were coming from a situation where the subsidy removal and exchange harmonization induced shock on the economy sent Naira on a free fall. It fell and went at some point to 2,000 plus to a dollar. It was that bad at that point, but we are now beginning to get stability to the Naira as a currency. So on that note, you will have to give it to both the fiscal and the monetary policy handlers for being able to weather that initial storm that the nation went through. Of course, you will have to give it to them also because the confidence in the Naira is also improving. We have seen at the international level where transactions on Naira denomination had stopped since 2022 under the past administration. But we have seen a number of our banks in Nigeria, of course, liaising with other international financial institutions, putting the Naira back as, of course, a means of exchange in the international market. We hope in the coming weeks, other banks in Nigeria. I was out of the country, I think that was 2023, and I actually did not want to spend dollars, so that was when I knew. Before leaving the country, I never knew that we had that type of an issue. I was almost stranded. Times I could make call, and somebody was able to help me out. So we must get to a point where that confidence in the Naira surges back again. On the negative, is the fact that I think sometimes there are some fiscal decisions that impacted negatively on the monetary policy of the government. And that's where both sides must ensure that they work hand in hand. And when there is a need to make any intervention, it should be an intervention that will not weaken the already pool position of the federal government. Like there was a period when suddenly some of the goods that were always leading to high demand for dollars was actually embargoed. But somehow, without any announcement, those goods from the back door, for instance, importation of rice and importation of some grains, it was done. No formal announcement, but it was done on a very large scale. And so at that point, it will weaken the strong position of the Naira when you just make interventions without thinking about the medium to long-term impact of those interventions. I think that's where and it's usually a fiscal policy issue. I think what we have seen in the past 12 months, if not more, on our monetary policy, of course, headed by the CBN, is that it seems after a long period of time, the federal government is now having a banker's bank in the real sense. We are having a central bank that is truly a central bank. And I think that is a good one for us as a country.
Well, in keeping the conversation moving, the next call is to assess the compressed natural gas initiative and its adoption across the federation. The Daily Trust newspaper headlined the story, noting that the pace of adoption has been slow-paced, and the fact that there are still lingering queues across refilling stations, that is in states that are privileged to have, whereas in other states there are no refilling stations at all. Let's get your honest assessment of where we are with an alternative that was promised alongside the post-subsidy regime gains.
I think we had this conversation sometimes ago, and I was very spot on that one major challenge with our policy trajectory has bedeviled the CNG. Well crafted, well articulated, of course, very needful due to the what will I say, the almost oxygen nature hold that petrol has on our economy. The hold that petrol has on our economy is such that if there is a little addition on the price of petrol today, it sends shock waves across the entire economy, which of course the adoption of CNG would have helped us buffer that. If we have a percentage, maybe if we can ramp up to 25-30% of our population using CNG on the road, that would have helped us limit that type of shock. But the problem with our policy trust is not always in the crafting, it's not always in the milestones, it's always in the execution. It was rolled out with pomp and pageantry, especially in the FCT and in Lagos and in a few of the mega cities. But a large number of Nigeria's population are not in these mega cities. Most of the impact of these policies will not just be felt in the mega cities. So, for instance, it was during a large discussion on this CNG that I told you that I noticed that for a number of months, you will go to even fuel stations in the cities and you will see very long queues in the CNG session. But in the petrol session, I still went to buy fuel last week. I was practically the only one. I just fueled and went, and somebody came in after I was. But the CNG session is always a very long queue in the FCT. So I was now wondering, what would be the fate of people in the not very congested places like the FCT, or across most of the local governments where you don't even have CNGs? And when I started interrogating some of the issues, I discovered two reasons. One, the federal government, of course, like most of its other policies, usually don't factor the fact that the federal government is headquartered in the FCT. But Nigeria is not just about the FCT. For you to have a policy that will have that direct impact on the people, you must ensure that you do everything possible to get the buy-in of government at the state level. So we had a few governors who had seriously keyed into the CNG initiative, like Ogun State government, Lagos State government, and a very few other. But majority of the governors had really not keyed in. And so we must interrogate why are governors not keying into this initiative. All right, I'm also aware that a governor like Professor Zulum in Borno had actually done a whole lot also on CNG. But most of the other governors have done next to nothing. In fact, I can tell you about 2, 3, 4, 5 states where CNG is practically non-existent. So it is the federal government who knows that this policy trust will reverberate and have a huge impact eventually on the macroeconomic landscape to ensure that it carries these governors along. You will need to also break down some of their fears and concerns. And we must also see how we can now cascade these things to the major food stations across the local government level. Because if we don't do that, like I mentioned earlier, the CNG holds a whole lot of benefit for the country. But with this trajectory we are heading, like most other policies, well crafted, well articulated before it, after a while, I won't be surprised if after the tenure of this administration, CNG becomes history.
Well, an interesting projection going into the near future. We'll find out how this happens, especially with the slow paced adoption of CNG. Now, let's come to another pressing issue that speaks to our national life, the issues of flood. This morning, NiMet has also released another flood alert for the month of July, and we have 20 states placed on red alert. This has brought into question debates on over 620 billion naira ecological fund domiciled in states. Mr. Seun, where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? Maybe I should add also that there was a scare yesterday, day before yesterday, that the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon also will be opened. And of course, you know the attendant effect anytime that is done, until the federal government came out through the Ministry of Water Resources that it was just a misinformation. It was not true. But we have seen this cycle of destruction, sadly loss of lives. But unlike what we had in Texas, where we had 82 lives lost and a lot of people still missing, what happened in Texas was urgent. There was no serious forecast about that. But in Nigeria, we will always get this type of report from NiMet. In fact, NiMet will tell us which states. Sometimes they will go down to the red zones, the local government that will be impacted. Eventually, these places will still be impacted. The usual suspect, the Bayelsas, the Kogi State, and a number of these states, Lagos State or your state, that are the usual suspects.
Now, just to add to the list of usual suspects, Sokoto State has been included as one of the highest risk states that would experience flash flooding. Yes, there is Bayelsa, there are the likes of Bauchi, Adama, Taraba, Nasarawa. What is more surprising is states that are not even close to the confluence in talks of Niger and Benue states.
Yeah, they are the usual suspects, all right? But sadly, the gory and sad situation will come again, and you will hear that lives have been lost. Commercial activities will be stalled despite these forecasts and predictions. And so, it is very important that the federal government send this alert directly to some of these agencies who are saddled the responsibility of ensuring that we don't have a repeat of what has become a sad episode in our national consciousness. Every year we get this forecast. Every year we still have loss of lives across the state. So something must be done differently this time around. I heard a commissioner, the commissioner for environment in one of the states, when one of the media houses went on the preparation because of the prediction. And I was shell shocked. He said, yes, we have sent messages to them and we told them to leave. So the journalist bought in and said, what are you doing practically to ensure compliance? And I was like, yes, we are still monitoring them. After a while, those are not statements of intent. Some people have their entire life. They have families. They have their businesses. You ask them to relocate because there will be flash flood, there will be, all those sort of things. What provisions are you making for them to live? That's always the issue. You ask people to leave their houses, their source of sustenance, to go to where? So we want to see state government saying this is X and Y provision. From NiMet prediction, 30,000 people will be impacted, and we have made provision in social places for the 30,000 people. We don't see there is no single state that make those type of strategic decisions. That is what we want to be seeing differently. That is what we see in other nations. So why is it so difficult? What people do with just a blink of an eye due to strategic planning, when it gets to our own climb here, now looks like rocket science, and we'll be losing lives. So we now come back, we will now be issuing press releases to commiserate with people who have lost their lives. I think we can avoid that this year if governors take this prediction seriously and strategically plan to ensure that people who will be most impacted are helped to get their lives going despite.
Now, in closing, let's talk about industrialization drive. This brings us to Enugu, where the Minister of Aviation and Aerospace Development, Barrister Festus Keyamo, SAN, had high commendations for the Enugu State Governor, His Excellency Governor Peter Mba, despite lightly joking that although he was not an APC governor, the APC will be proud of him. He talked about this prospect opening Enugu into becoming an aviation hub. What do you make of those remarks in spite of the industrialization drive in Enugu?
A great one. We all woke up to the news of Enugu Air yesterday, the new addition to the aviators in the country. I still have my question about the business model. I expect that the business model it adopted, of course, seems to be hurriedly done. It's powered by Z-Jet, and the only reason I learned why Z-Jet would power it was because it would take a longer time to get the air operating license, and I think that simply shows it was not properly planned. Also, we also need to not rejoice too early, because we are in this country when the federal government itself, under the immediate past administration, launched what they call Nigeria Air, and weeks and months after, we have not seen any Nigeria on air. So but I must also commend Governor Peter Mba. It would, of course, mean that more people will be employed. It also means that the earning coming from, because we've now had example in Ibom Air, powered by Akwa Ibom, as a model. So maybe they can understudy Ibom Air and see how they have been in business, not just in business. I think for people who fly regularly, you'll be also told that Ibom Air also have carved a niche for itself for being excellent in its delivery. So we hope Enugu Air will take after that, and the governor will see how it follows through to ensure that the people who are helping them to run it, the Z-Jet, they have their track record, of course. They run Enugu Air to become the darling of people who use their services. So it's a good one. That's what we want to see state governors do, not just going around and they are talking about commissioning projects. We also want to see them think about ventures that would put them in a position where in a few years, maybe a decade from now, those states will not be states who are waiting, depending on federal allocation to run basic things in their state. That's my hope.
But talking about impact, do you think that Enugu Air might shift the eye of the needle in terms of the cost of flights? I remember just a few days ago, we're talking about how the Nigerian airspace is one of the most expensive, most taxed, and the cost of air tickets are skyrocketing. Do you think that with more players like Enugu Air, we might begin to see a shift in the eye of the needle?
No, I don't. I don't expect that. Certainly not in the short run, not even in the medium term, because the infrastructures to get that done are not on ground. Some of not some, all of them, they still travel abroad for their major maintenances. They depend on foreign partners to run a whole lot of things, and of course these are dependent on global vagaries in the exchange rates and the number of them. So I don't expect that if we have even 4 or 5 more people coming, it will get any better. But like I did mention earlier, there are benefits directly to the state and to their citizens, which of course is the purpose of governance, the livelihood, the safety, and the well-being of the citizens. So Enugu people will definitely benefit from more resources if it is well run.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Seun Oni, for taking our time to speak to the issues in the news this morning. We appreciate you, and we wish you the best of the rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a delight to be on the Morning Express on ADBN.